Welcome, everybody, and this is our second segment of Embodied Masculinity. I'm very excited because today I get to introduce my co-partner in this whole mix of everything, and I loved this introduction, Toby. Toby is a community designer, hyperconnector, and serial entrepreneur. His current ventures focus on embodiment, spiritual entrepreneurship, and community design, while his work on the outside is at, in my opinion, too, the intersection of design thinking, innovation, psychological science, wearable technologies, flow, and human potential. On the inside, it's about healing, identity, exploration, and alignment. I think since knowing Toby, I think that just scratches the surface. And I think one of the components which I think is super important for me knowing you is you being a father as well, and what that brings to the table. And I think that's one of the things that we'll probably touch on and explore today. So introducing my dear friend, Toby.
Thanks so much, man.
And I think maybe let's get off with that and get on with that, because this idea of fatherhood is not something that I've ventured into yet. So I'm still very much living through you experientially, and people that I know that have kids, but yet at the forefront of my mind is that growing up in quite a absent fathered environment, and especially living in quite a matriarchal environment too. I know we share a little bit of an overlap there. And I wonder if you wanted to just talk about your experience being a father as a stepping stone into this conversation.
100%, man. Yeah, for me, I think that this whole part of being a father is, in many ways, I think the most beautiful thing. Also, I feel the most challenging thing at the same time. Because it's quite interesting. In sort of my life leading up to being a father, and I became a father when I was 25. So, and in many ways, it feels like before 30, I sort of went through all the things that, sort of the natural path of life, like what society wants you to do. Kind of, you got married, had kids, went to university, had a job, blah, blah, blah. And nothing felt really like that sort of like fulfilling. And yeah, I feel really that moment of becoming a father, or kind of going onto this parental journey. And it all started with just basically fun conversations of like, yeah, let's make babies. And but it felt so right, with my partner at the time. It was just like, oh yeah, let's make babies. Let's see where like our connection can basically go. And one of my mentors, Benjamin Hardy, he was talking about this analogy of when you're driving like a truck in the snow or something, and like your wheels keep spinning until you kind of put load in the back of your car. And that's a bit what I see with fatherhood. Is like, yeah, life is all just fun and games until there's suddenly that responsibility, and responsibility for like other people. And for me, it's the piece with like when there's other adults, I believe, okay, I mean, even sort of my entrepreneurial journey, and there is, I think, a fatherhood component by, leading teams and sort of setting a container in a frame. But it was all adults, and if like the thing goes like tits up, then whatever, it's ultimately okay. Like these adults can look after themselves. But I feel that the piece where like being father to young children, it's like, man, I really need to provide safety and stability, and I need to have my things in order so that I can provide a world for them that's safe and stable. And
what do you think were the contributing factors that actually got you to that mindset in looking at your kids at that way, and almost really, I mean, I know you embody that very much.
I mean, I feel there's also a piece in there that I mean, obviously I went through my own childhood experience, and I mean, seeing how, like my father was showing up, and I mean, I see in my behavior that I exhibit like, yeah, traits of my dad, and I exhibit traits of my grandpa. And but then there's also that whole other component where I exhibit traits of me, like the like uniquely sort of, but also I think potentially like a bit in response to the things that I was missing myself when I was young, like the just moments of like deeper presence, and just having undivided attention from my dad, or also being touched more. I think that's been a really like interesting and important piece for me, is just the component of physical touch. And so when we're on the bus, sometimes I kind of massage Max and Louis, and it's just like really cool. So my current partner taught me this like weather massage, and so we're sometimes just doing kind of like the rainbow, and then climbing up the ladder when like massaging up the arm, or like the little like rabbit jumps on the hand. And so it's really beautiful to see sort of like just relaxation, sort of like deeper into their being. And on the other hand, I see things like my dad did. We last year built a shed together, and it reminded me of this, like, this I think, rite of passage as a father. Like building a structure with your sons, or building kind of like a structure for your sons in a way. And
but it sounds like that there's also, so I know we're speaking about sort of masculinity here in a way, but it sounds like there's also very much the embodied feminine and masculine sort of intertwined in that. And that need for physical touch and closeness, and showing a different kind of intimacy. And not I guess, where I mean, I can speak for myself here. Growing up in an Italian home, I guess physical touch is quite prominent, but there is a very big divide in terms of what the man does and what the woman does, whereas you're also illustrating a real fluidity in both.
100%. I remember my grandma was always, because as a kid, I feel my way to basically connect with my parents, was engaging in activities that they did. And so I feel my dad was more sort of like outdoorsy and building things. And my mom was, I would say, more, yeah, homey and kind of cooking and doing gardening and like sewing and painting and things. And I remember my grandma was always like, Tobias, like when you're older, the women will love you because you make really good meals. And it's so weird, like, yes, okay, it's all well and good. But I wish that in a way, I think that kind of the roles would have been more clear. Because I, now looking back, see my grandpa, for example, he was an orphan. And so his, and I feel I'm having part of that as well. And, he didn't feel really seen by his mom. And so like I feel was all his life. Anyway, because he didn't feel wanted, he wanted to make himself needed. And so until he was dying, he was like always doing things. And then on my mom's side, her father was blind. And so my grandma on that side was like really like, she was like hardcore, man. If she read me a story as a kid, I had to sit on her lap. If I wasn't sitting on her lap, there was no story. It was like just super regimented, And so I see that in my mom as well, in a way that she's really sort of in the dynamic of my father and my mother. Then it feels kind of reversed. It feels like my mom is sort of the one that like creates the structures, and my dad's just been more passive, And I feel that then also actually has created a lot of, relationship, I don't know, drama in a way where neither of their needs really felt met. And so that is also in a way where, because my first marriage has like legally almost dissolved. And it's just like I realized, like, man, I didn't really know how to maintain a healthy relationship, or what like a productive like male-female dynamic would look like. And so I feel in that sense, I've been over the last years on this intense journey of like, what are actually like the gender roles, like, or how do I embody what it means to be a man, and how do I enable my partners to embody the feminine? And so I feel that is in many ways now kind of the culmination where you and I are hosting this like 12-month journey, is like, yeah, okay, I feel we have a reasonably grounded understanding, but there's so much more. I mean, it's, I guess, always what happens. Like when I start looking into something, I realize like how much more there is to know. And so in a way, yeah, doing these 12 months together is really about sharing, I feel, what I've learned from my perspective, and yeah, further expanding like how can we go deeper.
You said something very important there that really struck something in me, and it's this idea of healthy relationship. And I mean, if I look at where I come from, and the stories that I hear being a therapist, it's quite interesting that I could probably say, if I'm lucky, 5% of the people that I've ever actually worked with have come from a very healthy relationship within the parental structure. And the more and more I dig in the world of therapy, it seems like the masculine as a unconscious entity has really caused a lot of hurt. And I think that's one of the things that in this process of you and I working together, and this idea of an embodied masculine, I think that health question really does come in. How does healthy masculinity look? How does healthy relating look? And I know we battle this out because, as you said, there's just an abundance of information in trying to not only use our own experiential moments that we've had in life as men and growing into who we are today, but also taking the incredible encounters that we've had together with the men that we've met as well. Bringing in all these philosophies and trying to cultivate something that is, how would I call it? It's not even remaking masculinity. It's I wrote down something earlier where I quite like this concept of alternative masculinity. Something where we're really looking at how we can all collaboratively try and find this amazing space that we can embody and own, and not be afraid of really calling ourselves masculine.
I mean, I feel maybe that leads into like this whole like patriarchy matriarchy thing. Or also, I mean, Christopher Barnes has this interesting map of what he calls, I think, the relationship map, where he has the mature and I think the mature masculine and feminine, or maybe he calls it divine masculine feminine, and then the immature. And dude, I mean, when I first saw this, I was like 100% mate. This is how my parents related, like in these immature ways, where sexuality, or yeah, I remember my dad. When often before we started driving, my mom was sitting in the passenger seat. He put his hand on her lap, saying, "Do you still love me?" And it was this like weird kind of like forced thing of like when she was basically on stage, needing to decide that she loved him. But then there was all these sort of like sex as power instrument of and growing up in that and feeling like, wow, this is how it works, like and instead of really in the mature way where it's about like, look, how can I support the other person? How can I kind of like bestow? And what I'm beginning to see more and more is that it has a lot to do with being like stable and secure in oneself, and then giving from a place of fullness rather than engaging in a relationship from a perspective of like, what can I kind of draw from this other person? And I mean, that's also, I feel, been my sort of like awakening journey after the my first marriage basically dissolved. Was like, man, what is wrong here? And ultimately leading to that conclusion of like, yeah, like through my growing up journey, I developed like codependent patterns, and then that's how I sort of engaged in romantic relationships, so that it wasn't from a perspective of what can I give, but it was more from a perspective of I want somebody to mother me, and yeah, I want somebody to tell me like how I feel and who I am and blah 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 blah, like all these things. And I think that's just been, yeah, while it's obviously like hurtful and painful, and I mean, I'm also finding it kind of coming back to this whole fatherhood piece. I do at times really feel, man, like, why are my kids growing up in that sort of like ruptured dynamic. On the other hand, then it's like, wow, they have basically suddenly more people that love them. They have like a partner on their mom's side, they have a partner on my side. And they, from a very early age, learn that there is no right or wrong. It's just like all context dependent. I grew up in a world that was in a way like very stable from the perspective, like there were two parents that were there, but they didn't really get on, and
We're
it
not
was
there.
obvious. But then also it was just like, okay, this is how reality is. Like this is like one version of reality, and now my kids basically have that experience of, yeah, this is the reality in mom's world, and this is the reality in dad's world. It seems that both work. So it I think fosters that critical thinking, like once sort of their neocortex develops into like, wow, there's no right and wrong. It's all a matter of perspective. And for me, that basically came when I was 18 and started to travel the world, where I was like, man, I gotta see like what else is out there.
Do you think the passivity of your father had a big influence on you?
I mean, I even see it still these days that I notice they actually find it at times really challenging to own sort of like my masculine power. And because I feel there is something really, yeah, sort of, I think that there's something divisive about the masculine, and setting a clear boundary and sort of like, and my dad really never did that. It was always my mom. And I feel also in the passivity, there was this notion of sort of helplessness. And I remember he was at some point basically the sort of like financial person of this voluntary fire brigade. And so instead of like really stepping in and being like, look, I'll do the books, I learn all of it, he sort of then started asking my mom, because she was running our family business, for like, hey, can you potentially do that? And I was like, man, this is actually like really weak. Just go fucking step up. And if you decide to take on that role, then mate, figure it out. And I feel that is something where it's probably the biggest thing I'm kind of like working on, to be like, what does it actually mean to like hold my power in like a positive way? Because on the other hand, my grandpa, he was towards my grandma quite harsh. He would say like, hey, shut up and be quiet, like while everybody was sitting around the lunch table. And so it were the kind of two extremes, where my grandpa, I think, was too harsh and too divisive maybe at times, and my dad was like too chilled out and passive. And then it seemed like none of these things were working. And so I think similar to what you were saying the other day with like your uncle and your dad, it's like, what the fuck do you want me to be then? Like, because there was no third role model in a way. That potentially my uncle was the healthiest.
It's fascinating, because I mean that healthy role model never really presented himself for me in my world. And it's just thinking about this dynamic between those poles that you're talking about. It's almost power and force that I look at. And from my dad's perspective, he was very much in the forceful authoritarian position, and I think many men have kind of got that confused, that is power, that is stepping into one's power. But whenever I kind of sort of analyze him and look at those interactions, you call the word correctly. It was a real weakness. There was a vulnerability of almost not knowing how to step in one's power, and that almost it was almost the justification of him not being present. I work really hard, I play really hard, wife looks after kids at home, and I get to go do whatever I want because I need that space. I need to feel liberated and free, and which I guess in his world was the right thing to do. He had all the justifications to do that. But I think with all of us having a similar kind of role model like that, and your polarity of your dad and your grandfather was very much my dad and my uncle, and it just provoked a massive confusion in me in terms of, well, what am I? How do I express this thing called masculinity in a world, at least my world, which was very matriarchal in nature and strong woman, which on the flip side also gave me remarkable insight into the feminine lived world and being so close to that experience. I guess in many ways has allowed me to integrate the feminine in my world far easier than the masculine.
Interesting you say with like the kind of the feminine, because when I was running my first company, my co-founder, he was always like, dude, you're so like masculine. But it's really interesting because I don't really necessarily feel that, you know? And then on the other hand, I often see kind of the feminine as a more sort of like receiving quality. And I mean, from that perspective, yeah, I feel I'm like really like super masculine because I find it actually really challenging to receive and be in that, yeah, more like open space. You know, I feel there's certainly a lot of like structure in me of like, okay, cool, this is how I organize my world. This works. Yeah, but there is certainly, I feel that because I, as you said in the beginning, you know, I work a lot with flow, and I feel flow is something that's actually a lot more like a feminine quality. It's like where I begin to say, okay, how do I set basically the parameters of my world so that I then have these areas in which I can sort of free flow. And that then is an interesting piece when it comes to relationships for me, where when I look back, sort of the pattern I see is that I've kind of picked women that are sort of struggling, where I feel a bit like I'm like therapizing something, you know, and it's an interesting component as well, you know, to what degree does that actually highlight where I am at in my
Hugely.
developmental journey and in the ability to just be like, look, actually, no, don't want to do that. Then another component in all of that is, man, maybe that's part of my mission, you know, to sort of like heal something like for the feminine, you know, and this is like where I feel over the last few years I've been kind of contemplating that, you know, like, shall I sort of like push against it or sort of lean more into it and be like, wow, this is actually an awesome gift. And I feel it also leads into the whole next component of where I see relationships being these like healing containers in many ways. And there's this beautiful flower called the rose of Jericho. And it's this thing that we had for Christmas, you know, basically over the summer, it's like this shriveled up kind of little shrub.
Mossy.
Yeah, amazing, right? And then you put it in this bowl of water around the Christmas season and just like opens up. And then when the water evaporates, the thing shrivels up again. And it's fascinating because it's how I basically look at my kind of triggers, you know, like in early childhood, something was like open and like it shriveled up. And then I feel I need these deeply intimate containers to kind of re-trigger it in order to actually release it. Because otherwise it's just kind of like sitting there shriveled up. And I feel only really in relationships are my like most fundamental wounds and hurts accessible to me to actually like heal them. And so, yeah, relating, I feel from the place of, yeah, conscious awareness that, look, actually relating to somebody else is sort of a shortcut to enlightenment, because that's really where you're challenged to your core, you know?
I think it's so important what you're talking about, because the men that I work with in specific, and equally myself over this journey, have not been able to sit with that, I guess, accountability that comes from the feminine, really that mirror being held up at me, and having that moment of seeing who I am, you know, both in potential, but both in, you know, the flaws as well. And I think this is probably where I was very lost in the matriarchy, because it didn't, the matriarchy of my family, it didn't allow for the expression of the masculine to come out. My fantasy world, I think, was the expression of my masculine more than anything else. And And I wonder if this isn't also something that gets a lot of men stuck in, porn addiction, using escapist tools, things like that, because they don't feel that they actually have created that platform enough to face the feminine head on.
Mm.
And I don't mean face it head on violently or oppressively, or speaking about the patriarchy as well, but really stepping into that power and owning that space of whatever is going on inside.
It's really interesting when you share that, because I also felt that abrasiveness in a way. Because I remember there were a few moments, and one of them being I was writing, and at some moments my writing was, I think, leaning to the right, and in other moments it was leaning to the left, and at some point it was just like straightened. I remember my mom coming and being like really like rude about it, and being like, dude, you really gotta fucking decide, like, do you want to write this way, or just stop fucking messing about, just like decide. And there were a number of moments like that in my life where it really just diminishes all the sort of, because I feel I was already in a place where I wanted approval and attention and just that motherly care. And then these, it's just like sandpaper, man, just like, whoa, like ripping off another layer. And yeah, and these moments of like feeling really hurt and not being able to like go somewhere, like, and recognize that my dad wasn't able to like hold it for me either. And I was like, okay, just like the words of Jericho, let it shrivel up and park it somewhere and don't think about it, and bury it so deep that you don't even like really know it. And then, but the interesting piece is then like in my more modern day relationships, and suddenly similar triggers come up, and then it's like things suddenly blooms. It's like, holy fuck, has nothing to do with that moment really, other than that the emotional signature is in a way quite similar. And then suddenly sort of like the present moment gets loaded on with some sort of like past experience. And I feel having the awareness of like, okay, like what is actually happening right now, and what is sort of like all the like baggage from the past that will land.
What do you think you were looking for from the masculine when, I guess, in that realm of the feminine or the matriarchy? Because from my side, the judgment or criticism, or even just mothering and sistering, as an example, were more often than not perceived as massive shame triggers for me. And I think what's interesting for me is that shame came via the feminine rather than the masculine. Because if ever there was an interaction where my father would have to parent me, and he didn't really parent me that much, but when he did, it was once again this forcefulness of authority rather than an emotional entry point, hence triggering the shame. So for me, it was the fear response in relation to him, rather than actually feeling shame and guilt or those kind of lesser emotions.
Yeah, I feel for me it was actually, I was looking more for like a level of like space and connectivity, where, because I mean boundaries need to be set, and I mean I see this with like my own kids as well. And I think when Max was first born, it's just like, wow, I felt like I don't want to use the word no ever. I always just want to create choices so that there's like always the possibility. And I mean, at some point I recognize, okay, actually, no is quite a useful word. It is actually a word that creates space. But yeah, I feel in these moments, like with the writing, for example, like my dad sort of like coming in and being supportive, just sort of like dampening. Because I mean, yeah, there's probably like a point in what my mom shared. It's like, yeah, it looks more cohesive, if you decide like lean right or be upright standing or lean left. But yeah, I feel so and this is, I think, why we have two parents. because like when one sets the boundary, the other shall be there to, kind of like ground that
Say it's
experience
okay.
or make it land. Yeah. And I mean, I would also say potentially that the responses from my mom may have come from a place of like just being irritated by sort of like the roles being reversed and her needing to like hold frames that my dad actually should hold or should have held. And then, instead of really processing the irritation with him, and in moments came out. And I mean, it's also like, obviously people are kind of like going through their own journey, and I recognize now having my own kids, then look, we're not perfect parents. Actually, like our kids do highlight a lot of like patterns and actually give a lot of opportunity to kind of heal. At least that's what I am seeing, like healing my own sort of like childhood things. And so from that level of compassion, looking at my parents, it's like, look, actually, I gave them an opportunity to heal some of their childhood stuff. And I don't really even know like what sort of baggage they were all carrying. So there is there's definitely I think a reframing of many childhood experiences and sort of like looking at it from a more holistic picture, like now being a father myself.
I think what you're speaking about there as well, even with people who don't have kids, is there's such valuable points there that we can already start bringing into relationship in general, because it's boundaries, it's respect for one another, it's stepping into your power rather than forcing the situation. But then equally, it's in relation in my head that I think is the most healing component. And I can look at myself and say, it was in my relationships that I probably found the most healing components. And I look at my current relationship as that, and it's like it's been super important for me to bring that wounded child into the space as well. And it's okay if I don't have a blueprint of how to navigate that, but it's really being able to stay with that and renegotiate that. But that doesn't have to be my narrative that I carry on forward. And I think especially reestablishing boundaries with myself more than anything else.
Yeah, I think it's this leadership component.
Yeah.
Where a few weeks back I read this quote in my House of Beautiful business community, where it's like the first person you lead is the one who wakes up in your pajamas. And that's really where it all comes down to. It's like, am I able to maintain my own space and live up to my own standards? And once that is like nicely settled, then I basically don't even like need to lead from a sort of like place of like force or something. It's just like I just lead by the power of example, and it becomes suddenly effortless. And I noticed that in my parenting as well. It's it's just becoming so aware. Do my actions at all times meet my expectation of what I share with my kids? So when I say like, look, after you pee, you wash your hands. And then it was on Saturday, I think. I was in the bathroom and had a thing in my head. I was like, okay, this is the next thing I want to do. I didn't wash my hands. And then my son had peeked like through the crack and he was like, you're telling us like, wash your hands. But I was like, wow, 100%, dude. Absolutely right. So I went back, washed my hands. But it is just this thing, this like small reminder of like, is the spoken word congruent with what I'm doing? And if it's not, then basically like words don't mean shit. And I feel that has been a big thing for me also growing up. So I grew up in a Christian family, and so on the one hand there were all the like 10 commandments, you shouldn't steal, blah blah blah. But then my dad, he had like all sorts of like euphemisms for like to find a way, this is like, dude, you're still fucking stealing, you're just like calling it something different, and you expect us to not take the Lego from our cousins, but then you take screws from work, mate. Like,
it doesn't add
but
up.
I didn't sort of like challenge him in the same way that my son challenged me, and it's like, wow. But it's, I think, sort of like a healing piece for me as well at the moment too. Yeah.
I mean, it's being impeccable to your word. I mean, it's like, what's it, the 4 agreements, 5 agreements? Don Miguel Ruiz. That's one of the first things, and I think that's always something that's always stuck with me, where I think stepping into if we are calling it more mature masculine, it's being impeccable to your word and not living in half truths. And I think I was taught how to live in half truths all too well. Out of fear. It's out of fear of the consequences, or just trying to find those I guess alleyways where you can get away with things, and it takes away from one's authenticity, I think, and
Even with
integrity
just
more than
white
anything else.
lies, man.
Yeah,
And this is the thing. Even like recently, when people talk to me about like white lies, it's like, man, no. Like if there's a white lie, then it's just the gateway to like bigger lies and bigger lies. And I mean, at some point in my life, I had so many lies. It's just like, fucking hell, man. It's so constraining, and at some point, it's like always navigating, like, whom did I tell what? Like, and it's sort of like just ultimately, it's hiding a core identity, and I feel for me, it came from the place of disappointing someone, and now it's like, look, if it's a no, it's a no, and if you can't handle it, also your feelings. Fair enough. And potentially I can support you in holding space for these feelings, but it's ultimately
that
go learn how to soothe yourself.
That really resonates with me, and I think for me that's really where I've felt historically a lot of shame in relation to the feminine, because it is that letting down of the other, in not actually being able to be everything that they're hoping and expecting of me. And that's where I think those white lies come in, or those half truths, where you look for the justifications for that half truth as much as you want. So you have all the justifications. So you have a semi-clean conscience, but deep down inside, that shame is still there. And yeah, that really, 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 really points out the space that I used to be in as a younger man. And the worst part is that the intentionality behind it is never to hurt. That's what I find most interesting about sort of past encounters or past relationships as a younger man, that there's never really that villainous side that you want to inflict harm or cause pain for somebody. But yet the most excruciating thing is being truthful.
Yeah, I mean, for me, it was always from a place of like protecting the other, or hoping to protect the other by, not creating some sort of like emotional turbulence. But then, I mean, what it also resulted with in myself was like, it felt like I needed to hold more and 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 more things, because of not wanting to, create a rupture in somebody's world by saying like, no, I don't want that, or and I feel that, I mean, what you speak about with shame is an interesting one, because when I went through this whole codependency healing process, my sponsor in that experience was speaking a lot about shame and sort of like how it's within our like physiology, and how our system always wants to go back to that sort of like familiar experience. And because we were touching on that whole porn issue earlier, and it's full of this idea of kind of experiencing your masculine sort of like within your mind, and sort of the feminine more kind of like maybe in your sort of like present moment. And it's been interesting because I recognized it recently, that I mean, I think always, and especially also like in my whole innovation work, I'm very much in my head, in the ability to kind of like connect dots and see, okay, like, yeah, cool, this is a future possibility. That's something that could come in. And I mean, what it does, it sort of like, it moves me often sort of like from the moment. And so I feel my work has been very much to bring these like far future projects into what is like near-term future possibilities, the kind of these adjacent possibilities from that very moment to step into. And it is this sort of like escape from the body sensations into some sort of like mental construct. And that's also where I recognize like, man, yeah, I'm really strong in creating all sorts of like narratives and reasons and seeing connections. But so last year I started doing more body work to actually kind of harmonize what's going on in my physiology. And yeah, I feel there is, from when I was like really, really early in my like childhood, it didn't feel safe to be in my body. And so I went into my head and listened to like lots of like audiobooks and kind of like traveled in these like cool, crazy realms. But now it's really about just like being present in a moment, and like when partner and I are having a challenging conversation, being there. And it's actually really beautiful because I'm beginning to experience that I can feel pain in similar parts of my body as she feels. And
so the resonance is really harmonizing between you both in those moments.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's beginning to be a whole new layer of connectedness, where it's no longer just about the word, but it's actually if I'm present and if I'm not escaping that moment. And if I'm courageous enough to basically feel whatever may come up. And I feel sort of this whole like shame component and that piece of like not being good enough in some ways has always, I feel, been a big hurdle for me to just be present and being like, okay. And also recognizing that, yeah, if somebody else like feels something that's challenging, it doesn't say that I am the one responsible and then needing to feel like all the shame and the burden and all of that. It's just like, okay, I can just be here. It's okay that this person feels that. And I mean, the other piece that it highlights for me, though, is this whole piece around responsibility, you know, where it's like, am I responsible for everything in my world? Because, you know, in a way, like my mind and my physiology is basically creating my experience of the world. Or on the other end, like total hardcore, like, look, if you feel something, it's your shit. You know, I have nothing to do with it, and I will behave whatever I want to do. And what you feel is you, because it's basically triggers that are within your experience. And so finding sort of that middle ground is for me sort of like a big exploration at the moment. Where is it? You know, do I need to take responsibility for other people's shitty feelings? Which I feel as a kid I've done all the time, you know, basically taking on like all my mom's and my dad's crap. I did a healing session, like an energetic healing a few months ago, and man, that healer was just removing all these sort of like things that were basically taken by me, which were not my like own feelings or emotions. You know, were just like projected entities. And it's like, oh, holy shit. Yeah, and it's interesting, sort of like from an energetic perspective, because as kids we're so open, you know, and then there is that survival piece of like, man, I need these people to love me.
I think the more I engage in somatic work, my body really is a more tuned barometer to how I navigate those two positions that you positioned. And you know, it's like I've struggled a lot with my gallbladder, and I was reading up on Chinese medicine, and don't quote me here, but that's really the site of emotional digestion. And when I was experiencing all those moments, you know, I started piecing all these dots together and going, wow, you know, these are real traumatic experiences that I'm encountering. And it's interesting that that is the trigger point for me. It's like it goes straight to that site every single time. And now it's a case of when I feel those moments, it's almost this beacon going, hey, you're not doing the work right now. You've overlooked something. You're way too much in your head again. And, you know, putting me back into my body and actually really honoring myself in that moment and going, yeah, I haven't followed my baseline that is my go-to every single time, you know, whether it be my life philosophy that I'm creating, or just the bare basics that I need as a man for me to actually feel fully functional and able to meet the world.
That's interesting. See, for me, it's sort of the left side between my kind of the end of the rib cage and the hip bone, and it's been there since I've been in high school, and I'm still figuring out like, what is it? Is it stress? You know, like is it like, am I feeling stressed? Am I feeling unsafe? Am I? Because interestingly, also like the left side of the body is like about the feminine, and so there is this piece of like, man, am I not like fully open to sort of like receive in that space? So there's definitely some more exploration, but it's beautiful to listen to the body and being like, okay, cool.
There's
There's
there's a,
some misalignment. So let me, but then also, let me actually like really work with these parts of the body and like release the energy from it. So, and then just see, boom, like what's the experience gonna be like?
there's an interesting exercise on more the body work side where you do stand in front of the mirror and you look at your body and try and sort of understand the story that your body is actually communicating to the world. So, I mean, as an example, so when I'm training, I don't have the most developed and pronounced chest, because what's interesting is that when you meet a lot of men who have a very pronounced chest, usually there's a bit of an ego component that goes with that as well, or at least they're really meeting the world with a very open and proud sort of posture. Whereas my development is very much in the lats, and it's almost like that typical kind of Bruce Lee really going around the body as a protection that's really presented itself as an armor for me. And as I've kind of reverse engineered that and try to look at the body in that way, it's been super informative for me.
Yeah, super interesting. I relate to this as well. I mean, also in my family, so my brother and I, we both have a bit of a kind of like indented chest. And yeah, I feel because it's sort of just right there where sort of my the power center is, instead of like power coming in, it was like basically ingesting it all. And yeah, it's beautiful. I totally resonate with the body as instrument of deeper investigation.
I just love these conversations because I think there's so many things that we could focus on here on a minuscule level and then just sort of unpack. But I think this is also quite telling of how our conversations usually go, because it just bounces off onto so many wonderful things that I come away from these conversations just being immensely challenged, but then immensely grounded as well. And I think one of the components that I think is important to bring up is also the men's work that we do. The groups that we hold for men, and that space, I think for me, not because we host it, but because it's a very rare experience. That's what comes out of all of us. And it's really an invitation for anyone who wanted to take part to actually come and recognize that there are spaces, whether it be with us or outside, but that really stick with you. Every single one of our conversations has been a precursor to my growth that I couldn't be more grateful for.
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting piece that also David Data speaks about, that like as a man, you gotta hang out with your brothers in order to actually like really sharpen up that like masculine energy. And I mean, for me, a big part is also the whole accountability piece. Then I remember last year when we were doing our men's group on After Seat here in Edinburgh. I mean, it was very much this embodied experience because we met at this little lake and then walked up the hill together. And so it literally moved ourselves sort of like out of our everyday lives and then sat up on the hill around the little fire. And I had this leather-bound notebook that, at the beginning of every circle, I read out, okay, like, this is what you committed to last time, like where you're at with that. And yeah, it's just been so beautiful because like every time, it's such a sort of like altered experience that we have, like being in that space with like other people, like, or not other people, like other men who are like, there was one who was a father as well. One who was very much sort of into medicine work, and so he brought some of these medicines along. And yeah, every time being after 2 weeks, like, man, did I move into the things that I committed? And it's again what I said earlier, where do words and actions align, or is it like, I say some things in order to make myself feel good, but then actually I never really like do the thing. And so I feel it again helps with that moving the ideas into the body. Whereas, like, yes, we can say a lot of things very easily, but then, are we actually embodying it, and are we putting ourselves like through the potentially unpleasant feelings that come with having a hard conversation or launching a new product or whatever it may be?
Yeah. It's really that stepping up that resonates for me. I had a session this morning, and one of the things that I said, which I really believe this, is that when the male, or when the male, I'm sorry, when the masculine fails to step up, it's always the feminine that steps up. And I don't want that. I mean, please don't take me wrong. It's not about this being my sole responsibility to step up, but it's a responsibility to myself to step up, and not shy away and be afraid. And for me, that's stepping into my power. It's really being able to be as present, accountable. I know this is becoming a bit of a cliched term, but holding that space, not only for me, but for my partner or anything that I go into. I think that's really where I've had to learn how to ride that wave of discomfort and learn to be comfortable, a bit more comfortable with that. I think that's really a tipping point for our growth.
Yeah, it's super interesting. It's definitely this, like, being full. And I know in the last conversation we were talking about like penetration, and it's I feel in the level it's basically standing erect in the world, and being like this is me, this is like the space I'm holding, this is the direction I'm looking, and having that just level of like energetic fullness on being able to give and to serve and to bestow upon the people around us
in whatever form you take. Not that it has to have all these societal constructs that come in that, I guess, in the form big, small, medium, whatever it is, in relation to our tool of penetrating the world. But it's being really present with what we have and who we are.
Yeah, and it's really like in all moments, I feel sort of like energetically just having that. I think for me that's sort of like space of sort of like inner stillness while things are swirling around. And yeah, I feel especially also with regards to men's work, like knowing, I committed to to my brothers to actually do something. I mean, I don't want to come back like 2 weeks later being like, look, I actually didn't do it. Because then it's like, why didn't you do it? And then it is actually this sort of like healing masculine experience that early on when I was speaking about my dad, that there wasn't really this like positive challenging of like, hey, what's been in the way? Like, what's sort of like the thing that we maybe need to look at or dismantle? But, in the men's group that we ran last year, it was just like this, really feeling supported, and it's the other piece of like making oneself supportable. Because I feel so often in like the years in the past, I felt like, man, I didn't make myself supportable. I felt like I needed to like be able to do it all by myself. And I have the feeling that a lot of men sort of like in my world have
a lone wolf mentality.
It's lone wolf rather than being kind of like a pack animal, where it's like, look, you can capture something much, much bigger than just being by yourself. I just recognized like Andy was sharing something. Yeah. So Andy's just saying, I just read it out. So my dad wasn't perfect. However, he did hold a strong frame and acted as the lead for the family. But most importantly, where he was weak, my mom didn't traverse the space that was his. That's amazing. She was frustrated at times, but somehow continued to honor his space. You mentioned the feminine having to step up where the masculine doesn't. However, I wonder if one of the things lost in femininity is honoring that masculine space, realizing it is not their responsibility. For me, this left me with a very healthy respect for both. Mate, really amazing that you shared that, and thank you for sharing it in the last minute. It's been really nice having you along in this conversation, brother.
It's a big question to answer that. It was something I was pondering this morning. Actually, it's. I think, and maybe something that we can actually bring up in one of the next conversations. I think maybe a deeper look at this, but it's. I guess I can own this for me. It's almost feeling that whatever relationship I've stepped into, there is still almost like an accountability piece that is not mine. That's come from a past experience that my partner has gone through. And then that sort of takes away from her ability to honor me as the man that I am. But I also think this flags up so many different sort of issues around trust and the trust that you build together. And, you know, equally for yourself as a man, are you trustable in terms of who you present within a relationship? These are kind of words that I think are very important in respect to that answer. I don't think I've given you an answer that is good enough. I don't think, but I'd love to explore that more.
It's maybe something, Massimo, as well, that you could answer on your like Instagram, where you like take
Absolutely.
these
Absolutely.
snippets and ideas.
I will definitely write something on that. That is for sure.
Amazing.
Toby, I hope everyone has enjoyed this conversation, because there are going to be many, many, many more to come. I've loved having this space with you and sharing that space. And
yeah, thank you for the journey, brother.
As always.
Lots of love. See you all next Monday again.
You will.
Until then.
Bye-bye.